Hi, tonight I'm going to do basically a talk without any snakes. I fed the snakes last night, so I can't bring them out because I leave them for 2 days once I've fed them, because there's a chance that they can regurgitate. So tonight, instead of bringing snakes out and talking about them, I'm going to talk about some stuff that I've done talks about in the past. If anybody's got any questions, feel free just put your question up, and I can always change it. But I've got some pictures here that I used to use when I was doing a lot of talks in Scotland. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the big snakes, like the really big snakes that people keep, like Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, rock pythons. In the UK, you can keep any of these species of snake. You don't need a license, you don't need any previous knowledge of snake keeping. You can just go out and buy a snake. So the picture that I've got here is of, it's an albino Burmese python, but it is a baby. It is as small as they get. So this snake will grow a lot, but the problem that you get is people buy them, they see them in a pet shop and they buy them at this size, and they don't ask questions, they don't realise how big they can get. And I mean, I've spoke to a lot of people that have mentioned Burmese pythons, and I've told them how big they can grow, and they don't really understand how big, how heavy these snakes are. It seems like a good idea at the time. It's like, look at that snake, that's a nice looking snake, and they buy it. So this is a newly hatched Burmese python. It is an albino. It's not a normal colour. So it's got the red eyes. It's got the yellow and white. But it is. It's a nice looking snake. If you like snakes, it's a nice looking snake. The problem with it is the size it grows to. So we'll take this. This is just maybe a few days old, and you can see the size. It's in somebody's hands there. It was actually one of my friends in Scotland. He bred a lot of snakes, so I got access to a lot of animals that I could take pictures. So this is a very young Burmese python. So the next picture I'm going to show you is one that's a bit bigger. So if you go from that to this is still a young Burmese python. This probably is not the best example of how to handle a Burmese python, considering they're constrictors and they use their body to suffocate prey. A long time ago somebody sent me this picture, and that's the guy's son. I wouldn't recommend doing this with a Burmese python. That snake is so strong. If it decides to coil around him, he is going to be in serious trouble because it's around his neck. So that is not fully grown. So if I go back to the first picture, which was the newly hatched Burmese python, which is this size. The next one that I'm going to show you was bought at this size as a present for an 8-year-old boy for his birthday. So his parents bought him a snake for his birthday, and it was approximately this size. So what happened was, after a period of time, it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew, and it turned into a snake this size. So as you can see from the picture of the people's feet, I deliberately took the picture so you could see some sort of reference, and you can see these people's feet. Now, it took the four of them and me to carry this snake outside to take this picture. This snake was bought about the size of the last picture I showed you as a birthday present for an 8-year-old boy. Then the snake got too big and they didn't have space for it. And my friend, who he breeds and keeps a lot of snakes, he's got a lot of space. He took the snake and basically kept it. But we used to use this as an example of why, if you buy a Burmese python, it could grow to this size. I mean, this is a female, so the females are bigger than the males. And she, I can't remember exactly, I think she was 18.5 feet, I don't know what that is in meters, but 18.5 feet long. And she weighed, again, I'm talking stone, which is not kilograms, but stone, she was 16.5 stone, and 1 stone is 14 pounds. So if somebody's got a calculator, you can figure that out. So this is what you could end up with, and what happens is people buy them as the small snakes. They start to get too big. They take up too much room. As you can imagine, this snake doesn't eat mice and it doesn't eat rats. It was eating large rabbits. So you've got to account for that as well. I mean, if you buy the rabbits frozen, but I mean, it's quite expensive. She would eat 2 or 3 rabbits at a time, but there'd be quite a long gap between feeds. But when you're feeding a snake this size, if that snake makes a mistake and grabs you, you are in serious trouble. If she manages to coil around your arms, you're dead. It's as simple as that. What would happen is she would smell the food and she would strike, because she's in feeding mode. She would strike and she would coil. If she grabbed you, because she can smell a rabbit, she thinks you're a rabbit. She doesn't look at you and think, hang on, that isn't a rabbit. It smells like food, it moves, it's warm. So she would coil, and she would keep coiling, and she would tighten up. You would breathe out, she would tighten up. You would breathe out, she would tighten up. Eventually you can't breathe in, you would suffocate. But they also, because they constrict so tightly, they block the circulation of blood. So the combination of the blood not circulating properly in your body and being squeezed that tight you can't breathe, she would kill you. Then she would release, then she would realise that you weren't food, and she would just leave you. She wouldn't, it's just an instinct thing. She wouldn't try to eat you, but by then it's too late. There are, if you Google Burmese python deaths, or death, you will find stories where people have been keeping these snakes and the snake, for whatever reason, has escaped, and people have been killed by them. So they're not venomous, they're constrictors, but you have to be very, very cautious with them, mainly at feeding time, because if they make a mistake it could cost you your life, and I mean, it is that serious. So this is the reasonably large snakes that you can buy in the UK without a licence. So you don't need to know anything about snakes, and you could go and buy one of these in the UK, and it's legal. So make of that what you will. The next one I'm going to show you is half grown. It's a different type of snake, but it's bigger than the Burmese python. So that's a fully grown female Burmese python. They don't get much bigger than this, but like I said, it took 5 of us to carry this snake out to take that picture. The next snake is actually the longest snake in the world, and it's called a Reticulated Python. This is a Reticulated Python, and it's only half grown. And if you look at the size of that snake, half grown, they can grow to 10 metres long, which is like 30 feet. And and they have been officially recorded as eating humans. As you can see, the guy in the picture is wearing gloves, which really wouldn't do much good if that snake decided to grab him. But he actually took that in as a rescue. This was a guy that I used to know in England, and he took in rescue animals and tried to get them rehomed. And basically what happened with this one was the same old story. They bought the snake, and it was just getting so big that it wasn't practical to keep it in a normal house. So the people gave it to him, and he looked to rehome it. He would be in touch with zoos and places like that could handle an animal this big and had space for it. So that's the reticulated python, longest snake in the world, not the heaviest snake in the world. Heaviest snake in the world is a green anaconda. It's not as long as this, but it's more bulky. But you have to remember that this is only half grown. It's only about 15 feet long. So that's what 5 meters long. Very big snake. So again, in the UK, you can buy these things. You don't need to know anything about them. It's not against the law. As some people can probably tell, I'm actually from Scotland, originally from Scotland, and I live in Denmark. In Denmark, the rules and regulations are different. You're not allowed to keep snakes this big. You couldn't keep a Burmese python, you couldn't keep a reticulated python. I'm not exactly sure what the sort of limit is. I think you can't even keep a female boa constrictor, but I'm not 100% sure. I think the regulation's more to do with species than the actual length of the snake, and I don't think you're allowed to keep boa constrictors, but if anybody's on here from Denmark, I'm sure will be corrected. But I've never managed to find exactly what the regulations are. The main problem for me is that I don't speak or read Danish, and the things that I'm looking at are all in Danish, and it's quite difficult to find exactly what I'm looking for. So I don't know about the boa constrictor. People tend to think that the boa constrictor is a big snake. I mean, it is, I suppose, a big snake, but compared to these, it isn't. I've got pictures here. I did have them in order, but it's just I wanted to make a point about something. A second. Yeah, okay. This one that I'm going to show you now is a rock python. Again, you can buy these things in the UK. Don't need a license, don't need any experience, don't need to know anything about them, and you can buy them. This is an African rock python. What happened with this one is that's an electrified fence. The snake tried to go through the fence, got an electric shock, turned around and bit the fence. It died, eventually it died. So you can see the size of the teeth there, and you can also see that the snakes have got, instead of like one row of teeth, you can see in the top there, instead of one row of teeth, they've actually got another row inside. And these are curved back, as you can see. And most snakes have got teeth this shape, but just not this big. So you can see there. Again, in the UK, you can buy a snake like this. You don't need any experience, which is quite frightening, to be honest. But that's the rules and regulations in the UK. So the next one that I want to, well, the next thing that I want to talk about is actual bites, like being bitten by snakes. Because I've been doing this a very long time, I got to know a lot of people in the UK, and one person that I knew in England, she kept boa constrictors, and the rule with the snakes is to use tongs or tweezers, depending on the size of the snake. You want to use, like, the bigger the snake is, the longer the tongs you want, so that your hand is nowhere near when the snake strikes. This woman kept boa constrictors, and she did use tongs, but relatively short tongs, like for a boa constrictor. The tongs that she was using, I would use for like a corn snake, king snake, rat snake, but she was using it for boa constrictors, and they've got quite a long strike range. And what happened was she opened the enclosure to feed the snake. She had a rat on the tongs, and she offered it to the snake. The snake shot out of the tank, and it grabbed her hand. But all it did was it hit her hand, and it released immediately. But when she told me what had happened, I asked her if she had any pictures, because this is something that, for some reason, when people get bitten, they tend to take pictures because it helps to show people what happens, or what it's like, what it looks like, how bad the injury is. So this was a boa constrictor. I can't remember what size it was, but it may have been an adult male. I can't remember. It's a long time ago. So she sent me, asked her if she could send pictures, because I thought she probably would, and she sent this. So you can see she's got tongs, but they aren't that long for feeding a big snake. And what's happened is the snake has struck really fast, but it missed the rat, it hit her hand, and it released. So you can see quite a lot of blood. It's all dripping on the floor there. So that's what it looked like just after she'd been bitten. Now the next picture is to let you see what it looks like after she washed her hands. It looks quite bad there. A lot of blood drips in the floor. That looks like quite a bad bite. But actually, if you see what it looks like after she washed her hand, this is what it looks like. So you can see there's a puncture wound here, and there's I'll move the other way, I'm in the shadow there. And there's a puncture wound there, and that is probably it. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's one there. But here and here, so all the blood that you saw there, that was basically these two wounds. I think she's turned her hand and the blood has like run and makes it look worse. So basically that was it, and that was a boa constrictor. So when you talk about corn snakes, milk snakes, king snakes, rat snakes, they're a lot smaller than that. So the bites are pretty much superficial. All she did was wash her hands, made sure that she gave them a good clean, because being bitten by anything, there's a chance that they've got bacteria in their mouth. So just give it a good wash, and that was it. She didn't need to put a plaster on it or a bandage or anything like that. She didn't have to go to hospital. There was no big issue. So the next one that I want to touch on is this, which this was actually one of my snakes. Is anybody that's watching here, do you keep snakes? Or have you ever seen one like this? Sorry, I don't speak Danish. I live in Copenhagen, but I'm originally from Scotland. But this is a Western Hognose. As you can see, it's got this weird sort of point on its nose. It primarily feeds on frogs. And what it does is it uses that little point on its nose to dig. It smells the frogs or toads that are buried in the mud, and it will dig down using that little shovel on its nose. And this is, it's got a mild venom. It's what they call a rear-fanged snake. Normally snakes that are venomous, their fangs are like right at the very front of their mouth, but this one, the fangs are back here. So it needs to open its mouth and really get onto the thing before it bites. the venom that it produces is enough to paralyse a mouse or a frog. If a person is bitten, it can be uncomfortable, but up until the story that I'm going to tell you next, I had never ever heard of anybody actually being bitten by a Western Hognose. What they tend to do is when they strike, if they puff them, they like lift their head up and they puff it out like an adder, and they hiss really loud. I mean, they are small snakes; they don't grow very long at all, but they can make a really loud hiss, and the idea is that scares things away, and normally it would work. But what they do is they will strike, but normally they keep their mouth closed and they just basically hit with their nose and bounce off. It's the hiss that they rely on more than anything to scare things away. But what the Western Hognoses do is, if that doesn't work, they'll roll onto their back and they'll open their mouth and their tongue will hang out, and then they'll poo. And they just lay still, they don't move. And what they're trying to do is be as unappealing as possible to any predators, so they stink and they're lying there, they've got their tongue hanging out, they don't move, so the chances are that anything that's thinking about eating it is going to say, oh, it's okay, it smells terrible, I'm not going to eat it. They go away, give it a few minutes, the hognose will flip back onto its belly and then it'll just go on its merry way. But when the captive bred ones, the babies will do this flip over thing. But once they get used to being handled, they don't do it. They'll hiss and they'll puff their necks out, but it's all bluff. If you just pick them up, as soon as you pick them up, they stop doing it. But there's a story behind. It wasn't this snake, but it was a couple of my friends. They got 2 Western Hognoses that had been treated really badly. They weren't being looked after properly. I don't think they'd been handled, and they took them in as rescues. And one night I was actually there while they were cleaning out. I mean, they kept a lot of snakes. While they were cleaning out the snakes, I was there, and I always took my camera, I always took pictures of things. And I was talking to one of the guys while he was cleaning out. So he opened the box that the Western Hognose was in, and he just wasn't really thinking much about it because they handle snakes all the time. And I mean, Western Hognose, very small snake, and they kept Western Hognoses, had never been bitten by them. Okay, they hiss and they puff, but it's always bluff. He was actually talking to me as he put his hand in the box, and then suddenly he jerked his hand out and he had this Western Hognose hanging on his hand, which totally caught us by surprise. I mean, we'd all been keeping snakes a long time, had never ever seen a Western Hognose bite anybody. So, running out of battery. So, basically what happened was he ended up with this bite. You can see there, his hand's already started to swell up, and this is the bottom jaw. The teeth marks here, and then the top had actually got him round the other side of his thumb, which you can't see. It took us a long time to get the snake off. We held it under water, we ran cold water on it, blew cigarette smoke on it. There's all these tricks. We tried everything, didn't work, but eventually it let go. And a few minutes after that, this is what started to happen to his hand. You can see this whole area is swelling up. So that happened, and then overnight it actually got worse. And he went to the doctor. Hang on a second, I need to charge this phone, it's going to go flat. He went to the doctor. Well, I called the doctors, and the receptionist said, sorry, we don't have any appointments today. And he said, actually it's a bit of an emergency. And she said, well, can I ask what it is? And he said, I was bitten by a snake last night. So the receptionist laughed because she thought he was joking. And he said, no, I'm being serious, I was bitten by a snake. So she said, okay, just come in and we'll get you straight into the doctor. So he went in to see the doctor, and the doctor said, what kind of snake was it? And he said it was a Western Hognose. And she just looked at him and said, okay, I have no idea what that is. Hang on a second, she went on the internet and she googled it, and she said, okay, it says here that it isn't like that bad, just take some painkillers and it'll go down. But she said, if you have any problem breathing, go to the hospital. So that night, his wife, every hour, she was prodding him, waking him up to make sure he was still okay. But it took him, he said that it was probably at least a week before his hand felt normal again. So even though people say you'll never get bitten by a Western Hognose, it can happen. It did happen to him, but the thing was that snake had never been handled, and they knew it had been treated badly, it hadn't been looked after properly. So I think that had a lot to do with it, and obviously it looks as if the snake thought it was getting fed when he put his hand in the box. So it can happen. Again, this is why you use tongs when you feed things, so you don't get bitten. So I'm just getting the computer loaded here to charge this phone before it goes flat. The next picture is actually of me being bitten. I was bitten, well, I've been bitten by 3 different types of snake, but this was one of them. And being a true snake keeper, as soon as it bit me, back then we didn't have mobile phones. As soon as it bit me, I grabbed the digital camera and took some pictures. It's just the sort of thing that we do. Don't know why. Mainly because your friends that keep snakes just laugh when they see the picture. So this is my hand, and this is a Californian king snake. It's a striped Californian king snake. And what happened with this was I was just cleaning out its tank, and when I'm cleaning out the snakes, I just tend to like hold the snake in one hand, let it wrap around my arm, and I clean out the stuff with the other hand. So that's what I was doing. But Californian king snakes, they're very, or they can be very food orientated, and for some reason he thought he was being fed, and he wasn't. But he decided he was going to give it a go. So this is the side of my hand. I mean, he's a young snake, he's not even a year old. But he managed to get a grip of my hand. So I took a picture, and then he released. And I took another picture, which is here. And this was him actually just beginning to release my hand. But the way I've got my hand, I'm not exactly sure, but it must have been something like that, because when people see this picture, they think it's my face that's been bitten, and that's maybe my nose up there, but it's my hand. I must have had it something like that. So he released. Then he managed to grab the end of my finger, and he actually started to swallow the tip of my finger. And I had to put him in a basin of cold water and hold him under. I mean, snakes need to breathe, but they can hold their breath for quite a long time. So he was busy trying to swallow my finger, and he got down to like the first knuckle, like here. That was inside the snake, basically. And then bubbles started to come out of his nose, so he had to breathe, so he started working backwards. He let my finger go. I put my other hand in the water to lift him out, and he grabbed a finger on that hand end first. But because he needed to breathe, he just basically grabbed it, let go, and I lifted him out. And as soon as I lifted him out, by this point he'd realised there was no food anywhere, so he was okay. He never tried to bite again. So that's Californian king snake. A lot of people keep them as pets, and they are in general okay, but they can just be that little bit too eager to feed at times. So that can happen. But as you can see, I mean, he had like bit me there. There's no blood. You can't. I mean, you can't see, but there would be tiny, tiny little pinholes in my hand. But they don't really bleed. And just wash your hands, and you wouldn't have seen that again the next day. So it isn't really a big deal. So the next thing that I wanted, I'm just generally going through these pictures that I used to use when I was doing talks. Last night I was actually fed 2 corn snakes on Periscope. I fed them so that people could see what happened when snakes fed, how they fed, what happened when they fed, how they swallowed the food. But I also spoke about how when the snake is swallowing food, it completely fills its throat. And the thing is, you think, well, okay, how can it breathe? I mean, if we tried that, we would suffocate. We couldn't do it. But snakes, what they've done is their windpipe, instead of stopping at the back of their throat, it actually comes up into the bottom of their mouth like a tube. So when they're feeding, they can lower their jaw a bit further so they can open this airway and take a breath. I knew I had a picture somewhere last night, but I didn't have time to look for it, but I found it. So this picture here is of a Burmese, this is a Burmese python, an adult. In fact, it's the one that I showed earlier, the really big one. She had just finished swallowing a rabbit, and she yawned. So I took a picture when she yawned, and you can see there, and it's really clear.
They want to see the snakes.
That is the airway there. So that's how they breathe when they're swallowing big food items. They can lower their jaw, even when they're swallowing stuff, they can lower their jaw a bit, just so that the air can get in and they can breathe. So they've adapted their windpipe for that. I won't be showing the snakes tonight because I fed them last night, and I'll leave them for 2 days after they've been fed to let them digest the mice. If you handle your snakes too soon after they've fed, it can cause them to regurgitate, which isn't good for them. So I won't be handling them for 2 days. I might have them on at the weekend or something like that. I might bring them out and do another little bit. I'll be feeding them again round about the 24th, maybe the 23rd, maybe the 26th. I'm not exactly sure when I'll do it because I try to fit in holiday stuff as well. But I normally feed the snakes that I've got roughly every 10 days, but it doesn't have to be exact. It can be a bit longer than that, maybe 14 days. I mean, it really doesn't make any difference once the snakes have grown a bit and they've got good body mass. It doesn't have to be too accurate. So one of the things that I was speaking about last night as well was overfeeding snakes, which can be quite a common thing. I've met quite a lot of people who have fed their snakes too much. You wouldn't notice it as much in like the big Burmese python that you can see there, but it's more when you're talking about corn snakes. Snakes are opportunistic feeders, which means if a mouse goes past, they'll grab it and eat it. And if a mouse goes past again, they'll grab that one and try and eat it. So I've met some people who've been feeding their snakes every 4 days. Hatchling snakes, like baby snakes, that's what I would recommend. Every 4 days they get like a pinky mouse, like a baby mouse. But as the snake gets bigger, the food gets bigger as well. You should be feeding food that's about the same thickness as the thickest part of the snake. So you move up onto a bigger size mouse. When you're feeding pinkies, they haven't really got any real skeleton. They're just really gristle. They haven't developed bone yet. So there isn't a lot of nutrient in them, but it's good enough for a small, like baby snake. As the snakes get bigger, they need more. So they get bigger and bigger food, and they get more nutrients out. Like a half-grown mouse has got a lot more to it than a pinky. So one person in particular, he was feeding his snake every 4 days because that's what the pet shop told him to do. So he just kept feeding it every 4 days. Even as the snake was getting bigger and he started feeding it like bigger things, he was still feeding it every 4 days. And he did that for, I think it was about 4 years, maybe even longer than that. And what happened, I've got a picture. What happened was the snake became really, really obese. And you can see in this picture, this is the tail, and it should just like come along and just be roughly the same, slightly thicker up here. But what you can see here is this is fat, these big bulges, and they go all the way up the snake. It's really, really obese. For some reason, when snakes get fat, they never get fat on the tail. So you can sort of see there. And if you can just try and imagine what a snake should look like, it should be like maybe the thickness of maybe my 2 fingers, not even that. And it just comes up, but you get that, and it's like really, really overweight, really the most obese corn snake I've ever seen. And this is really bad for the snakes because you've got all that fat wrapped around them, it's pressing against all their internal organs. The snake won't live as long as it should. Corn snakes should live for about 15 years, they can live longer. The longest that I've read about is 33 years, but I'm not sure how reliable that is. But you could say 15 years would be the sort of average. This snake, I seriously doubt if it would live that long because of that. If you can see that your snake is starting to get that sort of bulge, you can cut down on how often you feed, and it will reduce. But when it's this bad, you won't be able to fix that. It might get slightly thinner, but not much. So it's bad to overfeed a snake, and people think that you can't overfeed them because if you offer it food, it'll eat. But it's because the snakes are opportunistic feeders. They don't know that you're going to feed them every 5 days, 10 days, whatever it is, and they'll just take. So if you give it one mouse, it'll swallow it. If you give it another mouse immediately, it'll take it, it'll swallow it. So then you've got like 2 mice in its gut. If you feed too much at one time, it can be a problem as well because the snake can't digest it quick enough, and what happens is the mouse or the rat or whatever you've fed it starts to rot inside the snake, and that can kill the snake. So it's the normal rule is if you feed something the same thickness as the thickest part of the snake, but in this case you wouldn't because it's so overweight. If you were doing that with this, you'd be feeding it like small rats, which is too much, and you would like keep this overweight thing going. So that's a very obese corn snake, which you never want to see. So that's basically overfeeding. The next thing that I want to touch on is nothing to do with snakes. It's just generally about people keeping things and not having any understanding of what they're keeping and how they should be looking after it. This next picture is a green iguana, and you can see it there. This is a guy that I used to know. He picked this up from a family who didn't want it anymore. They had it a few years. I think it's been a long time since I took this picture, but I think it's 7 years old. So this iguana was kept in a home, and it was kept in a fish tank, if I remember correctly, that wasn't actually that much longer than the iguana. It couldn't climb like up into branches or anything like that, and it didn't have UVB light. It didn't have the right lighting it should have, which they would use to convert into vitamin D, which in turn helps encourage bone growth. So it's really important for the iguanas. The other thing is iguanas are strictly vegetarian, and this family were feeding it everything, like human food, sandwiches, just all this wrong stuff. But it just shows that even if you're keeping it in the wrong conditions, you're not giving it the proper lighting, you're not giving it the proper food, it still managed to survive for, I think it was 7 years, I'm pretty sure it was 7 years. So it's still alive. But what I did was, there was someone else I knew who kept iguanas, and she really knew her stuff. She kept them in perfect conditions. She had all the correct lighting, she gave them the correct diet, she had like a big enclosure built, she did everything properly, researched everything. So she was really interested in iguanas, and that was her thing. So this one that you're looking at is 7 years old, and it's a male iguana, a green iguana. So the next picture I'm going to show you is this woman that I knew, her 7-year-old, they were at the same age, her 7-year-old green iguana. So if you can look at this one and just try and sort of remember the size and just the colouring and the markings, and then you look at this one. Tilt the camera. That is the size it should be, and that is the difference between knowing what you're doing and not knowing what you're doing. These iguanas, struggling to get everything in here, these iguanas are the same age. So even though it's alive, it doesn't mean to say it's healthy. So I mean, that is quite a large male, but it should be a lot closer to that size than that size. But these people had no idea. They were just feeding the wrong things. This is why I got interested in all this stuff. It's talking to people and trying to help people with setups and things. I mean, my main interest is snakes, but I've also dealt with a lot of other things like spiders and lizards and different stuff, cockroaches, leaf insects, stick insects, scorpions. So really all I'm trying to do is help, educate people, or just give them a better understanding of things. So really that was all I wanted to do tonight. It was just a general touch on different things. Hopefully as I'm on this more, more people will start to join. I'll get some questions and maybe some discussions going. So that was pretty much all I wanted to do tonight. So thanks for watching, and if you liked what you heard, please feel free to share. If you're watching on replay again, I would ask if you could share it if you thought it was interesting. If you can think of any questions you might want to have at some point, I'm intending to be on reasonably often. I used to do talks in Scotland a lot, all the time. If I wasn't doing talks, I was answering emails. If I wasn't answering emails, I was visiting people at home and checking setups and stuff. I did have a full-time job, but I also, this was like a major hobby for me. I ended up doing television work and various other things. So I've got a lot of experience of various exotic animals and the problems that people have, the things that people get wrong, the things that people maybe don't quite understand, they buy a tank, they buy a heat mat, they buy a thermostat, they buy a thermometer, and they just don't really know what to do with it. Where does this go? And I've had a few occasions where I've visited people and they've had the thermometer on the outside of the tank. So they're basically reading the air temperature in their room and not in the tank. I've had people who've had thermostats and they've had the probe for the thermostat sitting in the room. So the heat mat or the heater, whatever it is, ceramic heater, heat plate, is trying to heat the room up to the temperature, like not just the area that the snake is in or the lizard. It's trying to heat the whole room. So what happens is the temperature inside the tank is way, way, way too high, which can cause burns to the animal, like overheating. Snakes don't sweat. They can't. If they start to overheat, they'll die because they can't cool down. They don't pant like a dog. And they don't sweat like a human. So all they can do is try and get away. And if you've got the whole tank too hot, they can't cool down, and it will kill them. So you need to have a little bit of understanding about how the whole thing works. Why do you need a warm end in a tank anyway for a snake? The reason for that is that when the snake eats, when it's digesting the mouse, its body has to be up to a certain temperature for the enzymes to kick in to digest the food. If you keep a snake in a tank and it's too cold, there's a good chance initially that the snake won't actually feed because it sort of knows it's not going to be able to digest, but it doesn't always happen. So you'll get a snake will grab a mouse, swallow it, and then the mouse will just sit there in the gut and it'll start to rot inside the snake. The snake doesn't digest it, it doesn't get any nutrients out of it. It basically just ends up with a rotten mouse inside it or a rotten rat. I've seen that happen as well. I've also been there when a snake's regurgitated a mouse which had been there for 10 days. The mouse should have been totally digested after 5 days. So it regurgitated this like really bad smelling mouse. So again, it's getting a better understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it. I got my first snakes in 1984, and I've kept quite a lot of different species. I haven't kept any of the really big snakes. I'm not I'm not that interested in them because they take up too much space. So I prefer the sort of smaller, easier to handle things. The only snake that I kept that was reasonably big was a boa constrictor, and I only did that as a favour for a friend. He had a lot of snakes and he was rearranging his reptile room, and he didn't have space for this male boa constrictor, so he asked me if I could look after it for a while. So I did. I think I had it, I can't remember, maybe 2 months, something like that, while he set up his room again. Once he got everything set up, I gave him it back. But normally, well, I'll say normally, the snakes that I kept were corn snakes, king snakes, royal pythons, which in America are called ball pythons, Kenyan sand boas, a black pine snake, western hognoses, Everglades rat snake, Nelson's milk snake, Sinaloan milk snake, Dumeral ground boas, and I think that's pretty much it. I've probably missed some. But now, since I moved to Denmark, I had to give everything up. I couldn't bring all the stuff with me. So I moved to Denmark, and all I've got now is 2 corn snakes that I bought at a reptile show in Copenhagen in 2013, I think. Yeah, 2013. So they're 2.5 years old. I had them on last night and I fed both of them on Periscope just to let people see how I feed them and what happens, and sort of explained what was happening while the snakes were feeding and how they managed to swallow the mice that are thicker than their throat. So like I said, I don't handle for 2 days. I just give them a chance to break down the mouse before I pick them up. So that way I don't have to worry about them regurgitating. So that's pretty much it. So like I said, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be on here quite often. So like I said, if you like what you saw, what you heard, if you know anybody that's interested in this sort of thing, even if it's just to hear about it, not necessarily keep it, just let them know. And you can also have a look at the website, which I'm sort of rewriting, so a lot of it's quite empty at the minute, but I will be repopulating it. It was at one time pretty big, I had a lot on it, but I actually started to run out of space, and they were asking me to upgrade to the professional package, which would give me a lot more storage space, but I didn't really want to spend any more money. So what I did was I cut the website back, started rewriting a lot of the stuff. So it's a work in progress at the minute. I did some television work for Lanarkshire Television, where I took various exotics, not just snakes, spiders and lizards and creepy crawlies, different things. And I've got some recordings of that television stuff on the website. I managed to record 10 of the episodes. I actually did 20 episodes, but I didn't manage to get recordings of every one. So they're on the website, which might be interesting, I don't know. Hopefully it is interesting, that's why I put it there. But yeah, quite a lot of the website is in progress. So I don't know, maybe over the Christmas holidays I might start to populate some of it again. But I quite liked the idea of this Periscope when I found out about it, that I can talk to people and hopefully educate people, even people that aren't interested in keeping these things, they'll learn about them. So that's it for tonight. I'm not sure when I'll be back on, but I'll just see how things go over the next few days. Can be kind of busy building up to Christmas, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll catch you later. Bye.